Huh? Huh? Huh?
Hey, hi, hello even. I'm Ty. I like Death Battle a lot in spite of the ranking format always starting off with me talking about how much I hate Death Battle. Remember this? Any non-Death Battle fans would think that this season's gonna be really disappointing and mid, right? Wait for the next Death Battle ranking and then you'll see. Confession time. I had not seen a majority of this season ever since it ended. My opinion on it until now had been solely based on previous experiences and community opinions. I mean, it didn't help that the season ran during 2020 where the most significant period in modern history occurred. Justin Bieber releasing Yummy, a song so bad even by his standards that the world shut down. Of course, all the stay-at-home protocols meant that Death Battle would take a hit in quality, but by how much? That is the every Death Battle Season 7 episode ranked question. Death Battle Season 7 brought about 3 significant changes. First off, sex enhancements. Death Battle is on their knees pleading and begging us all to bone. Second of which is redesigns for Wiz and Boomstick, and dear God, they did not start off well with the hyper-detailed mouths, but they got better. Plus, they're animated much better and not on their own puppet rigs. Those would go elsewhere, but in Mystery Mouse Cthulhu fashion, you'll see for later. But hands down, the main aspect of Season 7 is a new production schedule. There are 20 episodes this time around, meaning my own hells from Seasons 1 and 2 are resurfacing. Episodes would now release bi-weekly, with both fighter previews dropping in the same week, and using the summer as a hiatus, with other small series being stand-ins before the second half. On the surface, this would be pretty epic. Imagine the timeline where you would have to wait 2 weeks for Android 18 versus Captain Marvel instead of 3. You know the drill by now. I mainly value the fight animation, but a good or bad analysis can sway my placements. Verdicts don't matter unless their own research is contradictory, and all placements are based on my own opinion. We have a lot to go over today, so shut up, Ty! The non-binary urge to put Batgirl vs. Spider-Gwen at the bottom of the list. I don't know what you were expecting. Okay, let's just get into this right away. One of the biggest reasons this season is so infamous is the episode lineup. And by that, I mean 10 out of 20 episodes featured a Marvel character and or a DC character. Now, that might not sound like a huge deal on the surface, but you gotta understand, these are 2 of the same universes featuring in half of the episode lineup, meaning they're gonna pull from the same feats and scalings and story and like all that. Not helped by how we sometimes got Marvel and DC episodes back to back to back in some cases. Batgirl vs. Spider-Gwen I felt was the last straw for a lot of people, admittedly myself included. Shoving aside how this is the 3rd Batman vs. Spider-Man episode in the show, in this season alone we had someone from the Bat family a few episodes prior, and this is the 3rd Spider-fucker! On the Batman side of things, they at least pull from a decent variety of gadgets, but the Spider-Man side of things? At least Miles vs. Static uses Spider-Verse effects, and at least Venom vs. Chrono uses the symbiote in okay-ish ways. Spider-Gwen in the fight just felt so creatively bankrupt, which is exactly how I would describe this entire episode. Of course, that's not a good reason for me to put this episode at dead last. You know why. Man, Man, I want to be like, well, what happened here? But no, it's pretty clear why the animation blows so hard. I understand that this is probably what the SFM team wanted to do, but this episode does nothing to play into their strengths of utilizing tons of magical abilities. It's weird. They've shown they can do good facial expressions on realistic-ish faces, and they can do decently impactful hand-to-hand, but I imagine there's a good reason it's not done so often, aside from not normally what Ganondorf, Dracula, Obi-Wan, or Kakashi are known for. So to have a matchup that's almost nothing but hand-to-hand is just... why? I can think of maybe a few reasons: that they probably loved the characters, which is fair, they wanted to get paid, which is also fair, or that they wanted a challenge or experiment on their hands, which is also fair. But the big thing behind that last point is that challenges and experiments can sometimes fail, and just about every movement is either stiff or way too floaty. None of the hand-to-hand bits feel impactful, and need I mention Gwen trying to take the Batarang out of her wrist? Well, I did. I can forgive jank in a lot of instances, but unfortunately, this episode is littered with awful immersion-breaking bits of choreography. Gwen knocks an electric baton off Barb's hand in a shot that looks like it sets off a Chekhov's gun kind of thing, but it's never seen again. Barbara sets an electric batarang on Gwen's chest that not only takes 1 trillion years for someone with a 6th sense to react to, but Barbara throws explosive rangs, jumps into the pit to grapple up in what looks like a decent setup, only for the most impactful blow to be a dinky kick. Gwen turns invisible, and rather than immediately putting her detective skills to work or just using her eyeballs, Barbara looks shocked for a sec and then just throws her batarangs in that exact same spot. Barbara outmuscles the spider web. I got nothing for that one. Gwen fires a web on Barbara's right hip, she grabs it and gets her hand stuck, then is shot in her left calf. Then the next shot is Barbara kneeling down, grabbing her right arm, and now is unstuck from the... See, in cases like this, I would hope Jank would at least help me enjoy it in an ironic sense, but it can't even save that. I mean, what is there? Like, the effects of Gwen showing up is neat, I guess, and the kill at least would have been cool if not for the horrendous dialogue that made it obvious Gwen was gonna win, and the kill face, which... yeah, that's a kill face made in SFM, alright. I feel bad for being this negative because the horse has been beaten so severely, like, I don't even think it's a horse anymore. I think the corpse has taken on a shape that hasn't even been invented yet. But I cannot think of an episode that has drained so much life out of me, man. The one saving grace is... surprisingly, the analysis. It's at this point we get the godlike comic book editing we get by animating certain comic panels, and it had some jokes I liked. I kinda like Dummy getting inebriated off EMPs. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that Dummy debuts in the second half of the season, and he's just a little guy. Can you blame me for thinking that he's the best part of an episode? Alrighty, deciding the bottom spot was the freest decision on the planet, but deciding most of the following was surprisingly tricky. Can't go a single one of these rankings without some tangent about how putting things in order is too much of a task for my idiot head, but at the same time, it's amazing how context can just challenge my methodology. Obviously, an episode I think has more negative qualities can hurt its placement, but more often than not, if I have less of a positive experience in spite of whatever the hell you may call objective quality, then yeah, rest in peace. I know that's an extremely long-winded way to say that I was honestly surprised at how low I put Gray vs. Esdeath on the ranking, even though I might have been more bored or pissed at certain episodes I'll talk about coming up, and that this episode gave me the least incentive to return to it. I want to make it clear how dire this first half of the season was in regards of character coverage. Yes, I understand the main focus of any versus show is how many gigatons Luigi's left dick can withstand. It's their ability to really dissect a character for who they are and when and why they do what they do is what makes me really appreciate how much Luigi's just packing. Most of the episodes this season, let alone the first half, even the ones I really like, have this problem with just bullet pointing versus shit, and I just want to death. Gray's rundown is especially jarring to me because on top of all the versus junk, they go over everything he can do under the Ice Lady's mentor, then talk about some stripping thing, then focus on one of the only instances of story in his rundown when she died, then they go back to joking about stripping, like, huh? But I gotta say, man, Boomstick, buddy, I just wanna... Oh dear god, the fight. See, this is where the point of laser focusing on versus junk really hurts the animation, because I had no idea that these characters that fight like monkeys are apparently some of the most intelligent of their own shows. Gray goes for a giant hammer swing, and rather than just moving out of the way, Esdeath decides to create these dinky barriers, and look how that turns out. But then, Gray does the big hammer thing again, and Esdeath's attempt to defend it is somehow worse. How? The army battle is hardly an army nor a battle, and they both use their strongest attacks when put at the slightest inconvenience. The worst of which is Gray using the big I'm taking you with me move after being put on the tiniest of the back foot when Esdeath decided to actually fight back. For all this talk about Esdeath's military experience and Gray's character development, they hardly use any of that and just throw out moves willy-nilly. You know what, while it's on my mind, the death blows. It was kinda hype to see Gray resist the Mahoptima, but Esdeath makes this goofy-ass face as Gray somehow gets frozen in spite of him already resisting all of her ice attacks even just 2 seconds ago. And aside from that, what happened? Was that like the effect of the lost ice shell taking Gray's own life accelerated by Esdeath's stabby maneuver? Because I got nothing else for that one, it just kinda happened. On the audio side of things, Lost Ice Storms is a neat track, and Gray's voice performance is fine with the exception of that one line, and Esdeath...
You have no right to feel my boot against your face.
Oh yeah, I neglected to mention the other recurring trend in Season 7 death battles that have aged absolutely poorly, sprite battles with puppet rigging. It was awesome for one episode, and for all the others that used rigs after that had mostly stiff posing and movements, and this episode is no exception. Well, at least watching this didn't feel like a 50-year slog like Batgirl vs. Spider-Gwen, but on the other hand, this was already another ice-themed death battle. Can you take a wild guess about the material I had to work with? No, really. Guess. Black Canary vs. Sindel is a death battle episode where Wiz and Boomstick talk about Black Canary and Sindel, and then Black Canary and Sindel fight. Huh? The analysis was better than I thought it would be. I thought it was just gonna be more boring versus junk with jokes that are ironically funny like the not gonna lie whiz bit, but it turned out to have more boring versus junk with jokes that are ironically funny like the not gonna lie whiz bit, and featured Cyber Goose. Let's go! The fight doesn't surpass any expectations though. It certainly is the 18th best Death Battle Season 7 episode. The choreography is a bunch of animation, so let's instead run through some bullet points. Canary's ribs shatter? Nothing. Her leg? I know this is rich coming from me, but what is going on with Sindel's hair? It makes mine look like a well-kept mane. Can you tell writing this script took me a billion years? What's with these hand-drawn close-up moments that barely last a second, but this hair animation that I would expect to have the hand-drawn style to go to is just one big sprite? Hey, how do you think a death would be between two screaming ladies in? I swear to God, if you say it's an abrupt punch to the face that doesn't even look like it decapitates Sindel, get out! But I think the most iconic aspect about this episode is the over-fucking written dialogue that I just hear the team biting their lips over. I thought some of Canary's lines worked. She had some snappy comebacks and some of her jokes made sense given her hubby is Oliver Queen, but Sindel...
Such a pretty bird with such an ugly song. Tell me, can you fly?
You idiot! That implies birds are even real, let alone able to fly. I gotta say, this episode certainly was. If my main takeaways from this are hearing about how decibels work and inside jokes I barely understand but got gaslit into thinking are funny, then yeah, that's about accurate, really. Something I want to do for future rankings is try to pinpoint what I consider the biggest disappointment of each season. Thanos vs. Darkseid is the biggest disappointment of all time. Look at us now. I'm glad I got my big old disappointment of the season thing out of the way in the last ranking because honestly, I think season 6 is the one season I can think of that doesn't have a standout disappointment. Watch me try anyway. So my pick for season 7's disappointment isn't the one you immediately think of. Okay, with that episode, I can at least say in spite of all its glaring flaws that it did what it tried to do, at least for me, so you'll see what I have to say about all that later. But when the prior season gave me my favorite episode ever and the penultimate finale of this season would have my favorite character's protege, I would at least expect a fraction of the same character love and adoration and a somewhat compelling animation. Instead, Sanji vs. Rock Lee ended up being one of the most dull experiences while also somehow being utterly aggravating at the same time. The analysis was fine, had some good jokes like Dummy getting beaten to shit, but it also had the
Yeah, that move's pretty lit.
No, the real hellscape is when the fight happens. Okay, I hate to pin a lot of my grievances on this episode because of everything that All Might vs. Might Guy did. I mean, that one is a season finale, and this one is kind of just another episode before the finale. But I at least hope they wouldn't do some of the worst character assassination moments since Aang vs. Ed. Yes, Rock Lee, famous for being admirable and incapable of hating food, bitches like a 7-year-old about the food being too mild after his face turned red upon tasting it. How? Why? I don't know, but it sucks. At least Ed's assassination was an attempt at comedy, and at least Aang made it so Ed wasn't the only one bastardized. In general, Lee just acts like a dick making MCU one-liners. But hey, at least Sanji immediately picking a fight with his customer like a dipshit isn't as annoying. The voice acting, or rather the voice direction, kinda stinks. Mark Phillips as Lee? Okay, look, I really can't be too hard on it. It was his dream to voice Rock Lee in some capacity, and in a vacuum, he gave a very good performance. It just doesn't really sound like him. It's one of those performances where I more imagine the guy in the recording booth rather than the guy getting pissy over some curry. Young Yas Sanji fares a lot better, but has some really awkward line readings and dialogue, but we'll get there. Of course, it's a season 7 sprite fight, so the riggings look like shit. But mainly, again, Lee's rigging is awful. Give my boy a break! Except here, they morph the sprites sometimes, and like, man, if they were stretched so thin, then they probably should have used the JUS sprites, but I imagine there's like a reason why they didn't. A lot of the sound design in particular is just not great. They have these gong-like hits throughout, and they just don't really feel impactful. The progression of the fight also kind of reeks. Lee spends a good chunk of the fight in his drunken state, which is the one area I can at least stretch myself to say the janky rigs make sense. And then he blitzes through the gates for what I can only assume is to hit Sanji harder, and rather than using his 8th gate like Guy did as a do and die scenario, no, let's just do it because why not? It's the final form. Who needs a decent reason? When the most Lee does to Sanji outside of his drunken state is explode Sanji's leg, we have a problem. Fuck, Lee hardly does anything. Most of his strongest attacks do nothing, and Sanji just acts like they never happened. Not even letting out a grunt whenever his whole leg gets blown apart. I wanted to put this in dead last because I'm a petty bitch, but I gotta admit, there were at least some positives. Full Course Will is catchy and fun. I guess I liked some of the choreography in a vacuum. They incorporated the handsome Squidward meme in a way that is not only funny, but actually makes sense because Sanji can do that, and the hand-drawn stuff is really good. But that's also the only good part about the death. Lee dies in 2 kicks, and Sanji has overwritten dialogue that would have been badass if he just shut the fuck up about halfway through. It also goes against what they said in the conclusion, where Sanji's win con was avoiding and outlasting the 8th gate, and not, oh, I don't know, being able to overpower him in 2 hits. I can only hope One Piece gets more coverage in the future, since this is just embarrassing. And I know Naruto episodes have been wishy-washy in the past, so I guess all I can do is be thankful that this one holds me accountable, so thanks. Ladies and germs, it's time for a new concept. With the new schedule allowing for a break in the middle of the year, we now have this idea of a mid-season finale. Yippee! And the first one to fit that bill is She-Ra versus Wonder Woman, and yeah, that tells you all you need to know right there. The only thing I really got from the analysis is the cutaway where Wiz's next experiment is a de-aging solution, huh? Wiz, you're fucking weird. Now onto the fight, and it's so cool how I can just alternate between fights that aggravate me to no end and then have fights that give me almost nothing to work with. Okay, the action itself is neat, I guess. It's nice to look at sometimes and has this shot of them fighting in the forest while the camera rotates around them. That's really cool. But we're not narrowly escaping the bottom quarter of the list for nothing. All right, this is another Thanos versus Darkseid situation where you have these two insaneo crazy combatants and they do fuck all. They go over these dummy absurd feats in the analysis, and the most that gets destroyed here is an invisible jet and trees. Cosmic proportions, if you're, you know, an ant. Really, this could have just been Link versus Cloud 1.5 and nothing would really change. Oh wait, never mind, I lied. We wouldn't get the epic dialogue exchanges of Wonder Woman gloating and then telling She-Ra to stop gloating not even a minute afterwards and then gloating yet again at the very end. Damn, man. It sucks that a fight that was literally unfinished had more stakes than this one, but it do be like that, I guess. Even for as technically impressive as this fight can be, there's still some quirky jank, mainly with She-Ra doing her super breath and then immediately cutting to the reaction of that, glossing over the impact blow of it. And the death where She-Ra's hair is still intact despite her whole head getting cut off. In fact, the whole ending kind of reeks. She-Ra somehow breaks Wandi's gauntlets and goes into her goddess state, but all it does is yoink She-Ra's blade away, pushes She-Ra to a tree, and yeah, that's it. It's a sword that slices atoms, and this was the ending blow? Aside from it being mostly technically solid, the best thing I can say about this episode is that it fulfilled the Herculean high bar task of being better than Rogue versus Wonder Woman. I love it here. You know we're in the hell timeline if one of the few times a creator gave public endorsement for a death battle was the if Scooby-Doo was people guy. Danny Phantom versus American Dragon Jake Long. That's a title. The analysis definitely gave me some material to work with. First off, apparently people hated Wiz and Boomstick butchering the theme songs for both series, but it's one of those things where I thought it was cringy, but endearingly cringy. I don't know, if anything, the bit that scratched my head was Wiz asking Boomstick if he was going to do that for the whole episode. He said probably, and then didn't do it at all. Well, I guess that means he wasn't really wrong. Also, Boomstick shakes his, god damn, what are you doing later? Top 1, most concerning death battle sneak peeks. Yeah, the first half is just not good. Classic stiff and jank puppet rigs that are just getting worse and worse and worse as this season goes on. Pacing completely fucked. Danny's mouth looking worse than the season 7 premiere Wiz and Boomsticks. Honestly, the bits that stuck out most to me were Jake yelping in pain right here and the iconic funny mummy. I see they've been taking notes from Namor. Thankfully, the action does pick up once they're out of the museum. The clone battle is actually compelling, and the fire and ice effects contrasting with the Night City is pleasant to look at. I'll even be insane enough to say that I actually like American Phantom as a backing track. I don't know, as AIDS as the pacing is, it at least complements the action in the museum and a battle in the night sky decently enough. Sure, in the second half, it is a little jarring to hear something so low-key when the action gets this hectic. The ending reeks just enough to bring me back into reality. Danny does an end rap that would have fit the same endearingly cringe aspects of Wiz and Boomstick butchering the theme songs if Danny's rap was, like, finished. And it's just another laser death, but it's worse because it's just a random laser when Danny already used his strongest attack and it did nothing. That's nice. Though Jake coming back as a ghost and getting yoinked in the thermos was pretty cute, I gotta admit. Well, that wasn't completely trash, but it still wasn't good. I don't know if it's funny or depressing that joking about wanting Boomstick carnally is the only thing I get out of this episode, so I'm just gonna let that be up for interpretation and move on.
coming after Winter Soldier versus Red Hood. It's gonna be Krona from Soul Eater versus...
Venom versus Krona. You know, I'm not at all surprised, but I still gotta ask why. Let's run through the list. Third episode in a row to feature a Marvel and/or DC character, cracking an epic joke about Marvel Venom and DC Venom not being the same in the episode immediately before it, going against the main connections of the two characters in a symbiotic relationship by hardly taking advantage of that at all. You know the matchup is a snooze fest when there was way more debate about which version of Venom they were actually gonna use rather than if he can win. I love it. I got next to nothing from the analysis, but I do appreciate more emphasis on story this late into the season after sitting through so much versus shit, so that's pretty neat. The fight? Well, hey, I gotta hand it to him. It is better than Venom's other fight. Imagine the timeline where this was the high bar for Venom and death battles. But at the same time, that other episode at least made me feel things. Granted, those things were wanting to gouge my eyes from my brain from the inside out, but this episode, it's real. That's the official Venom versus Krona. That's awesome. Granted, I do have more positives than negatives. Krona's puppet animation is actually fitting given her official animation style. Ragnarok is also expressive solely through body language. Voice performances were mostly solid, even though Venom is still very carnage-coded. Krona's facial expressions getting more and more deranged as the fight goes on. FNAF jump scare. The initial black blood reveal was unnerving. This shot of Ragnarok gobbling up Venom and Eddie's souls. The Carnage versus Lucy references at the end and conclusion were neat, and unironically, my favorite part of the whole episode is Venom reciting the "This is Halloween" in a way that made sense and was bone-chilling. But other than all that, this fight was just fine, though not devoid of negatives by any means. Venom's wings here being a different sprite density than his own model, the air battle as a whole amounting to Jack Diddley Dick, and even though Venom gets another awesome speech at the end of the fight, he stands and does nothing as he dies. Pretty pogger. Now, I'm not one to request things to not happen on Death Battle. It's their show and business and they gotta pay bills somehow. But can these symbiotes just not? Not even because we have yet to have an episode that goes above being pretty good, but it's a predictable flowchart method of it being a stomp in the symbiote's favor or being a stomp against the symbiote, all depending on whether or not the opponent can exploit the weaknesses. We've had episodes that decide whether or not characters even have a way to kill the other, but we've run this experiment through the ground already. That sure was a Venom and Krona death battle though, so they accomplished that objective with colors. Zuko vs. Shoto Todoroki is commonly considered the season's biggest disappointment, and at first it was mine too, until I remembered Sanji vs. Lee existed. It's kind of funny, I placed this episode way higher than I thought I would, and I've slowly liked it little by little since it came out. But I still don't really like it that much. The analysis, Todoroki's was fine in spite of him being a part Ice-type Pokemon, leading to some epic banger jokes, and Zuko's was the worst rundown in all of Modern Death Battle. It's an Avatar episode, so let's shittily insert all the obvious memes just to shittily insert them in, and even the jokes outside of the Avatar circle are just... Wiz crushing on Zuko. No. Okay, sure, he's 18 by the end of the series, but not only are you trying to justify calling a barely 18-year-old fire daddy, but it also doesn't help the vast majority of the footage they show is Zuko in his teen years. I mean, it's kind of rumored to be a reference of one of the writers that had a massive childhood crush on Zuko. That's great. But why project that onto Wiz? If they showed B-roll of Zuko during the Korra series and demonstrated that Wiz is bi and into gilfs, sure. But it's all the surrounding circumstances that make this pretty strange. But at least if you're enough of a fuckhead, you could try to spin this into someone not trying to get onto a list, which the same definitely couldn't be said for the 6 Boomstick dad jokes. Out of those 6, Zuko's analysis had 5, and if you weren't sick of them before, this was the episode to kill myself. Honestly, the only thing I can give these rundowns credit for is that in lieu of the obvious groaners, they never shoved a Captain Planet reference when describing all the elements. Thanks. Anyways, the fight is fine. Has the immediate negatives of more awful puppet rigging, an unepic setup where Zuko practices fire in the middle of a fucking forest, and Todoroki deciding to pick a fight to the death over a freak accident. More character bastardization where Todoroki still goes on about wanting to be better than his dad, even though a few minutes ago they said he doesn't really do that anymore, and Zuko still goes on about his honor. Gee, Todoroki, why the long face? The choreography in general not being super memorable and a little too sluggish for two dudes that have zippy-dippy fire stuff. Whatever, this this is. Nobody's saying that's rough, buddy. But this fight also has a lot of legitimate good to it. They got Dante Bosco to reprise his role and didn't even need to hide it. The battle track is pretty sick, starting off like an Avatar piece and then incorporating the shredding guitar solo a la My Hero Academia. The fire and ice effects are stunning. This shot, in spite of stiff posing, a majority of the hand-drawn moments are nice, and the moments attached to them are phenomenal, such as the He's Like Me bit, and especially Todoroki's Go Further Beyond moment. The death is really good, as Zuko gets stabbed by Todoroki's fuck off ice move and then disintegrates right after. You know, I've slowly been warming up to this episode over time, and I feel like certain areas get a bad rap, but overall, the good does not outweigh the bad, and the analysis fares much worse. Though having a decent chunk of positive takeaways did net this higher than most people probably think it deserves to go, but still. Again, this is the guy that thinks licking Glacius is fucking weird. Alright, sure, buddy. Well, boys, we're finally at the episodes I can say I don't not like. So let's go over Genos versus War Machine. Listen, Wiz gets Kiru and Boomstick says Genos. You sure do love to see it. Analysis is more overload on versus shit, though Rhodey's does touch on his PTSD, and I thought that was nice. Boomstick confirmed himself to be just as worthless as Dan Hibiki, if you've ever seen that episode. Boomstick being horny over a mosquito, and look, listen, I've had freak behavior in this ranking, but that needs a swatter. And an Elon Musk promotion, hooray! Anyways, the fight.
I don't fall apart that easy.
This was not the fight I would expect to be hand-drawn, but you know, I don't think it's fair to pin that against this episode because, let's be real, Danny versus Jake or Zuko versus Todoroki would have only fared mildly better if we just suddenly switched the art styles. In spite of this taking place in a drab desert for some reason, the effects are at least nice to look at, and at least one of the combatants fits the art style well. Something about Genos looks like a mid to high budget Disney XD cartoon. I'll let you judge if that's a good or bad thing. At least most of the battles well animated, in spite of some mostly decent choreography and these rapid hand-to-hand clashes looking like dog shit. I also thought it was cute with Genos' UI being in Japanese and Rhodey's is in English. In fact, with the latter, it was cool to see him identify Genos and then come up with a strategy on the fly. Both characters get their chance to shine, like Rhodey's forward air. Genos getting used the big incineration cannon several times in a desperate attempt to kill Rhodey, in spite of it going on a smidge too long and him not even saying incinerate when that's apparently his thing. And my favorite of which is the end when Rhodey fires a big laser through Genos' chest, getting bigger and laserer as Genos decides to go out on his own terms along with Rhodey. And then they ruin the moment with this quirky dialogue at the end. Hell yeah! Overall, it was decent. Didn't get much out of this one, and it is sadly the worst of the 3 One Punch Man episodes we have so far, but at least that means the track record isn't hellish. I love how we're at the episodes I say I don't dislike, only to follow up with this one being decent, and how we're almost at the halfway point. That's so awesome! Okay, now we're at the good shit. Hey, it's a better ratio than Season 3. I consider that an epic win. And starting off the fuck train is Miles versus Static. I honestly thought this was going to be higher up. Don't get me wrong, I remember it being a good episode, but I guess I just liked the rest of the episodes more. The analysis was pretty neat in spite of Wiz and Boomstick taking the Lovecraftian approach to existing, and the constant electric puns, which I gotta hand it to him, I sure did not care. Though the iconic Jizz and Broomstick make their only appearance, so that's a fair balance. Now I hope to God the third Marvel vs. DC premiere in a row throws us right into the fight with the only setup being 2 lines of dialogue insinuating that it happened off screen.
Whoa! Watch where you're aiming. I got places to be tomorrow. For real? You attack me!
Yes! On the note of negatives, the only ones I feel are worth mentioning are the underwhelming death in spite of the good visuals and a decent chunk of the animation kind of meandering at points. So that's it. Being the season premiere, it was the first fight of the season to utilize the puppet rigs we all know and despair Season 7 for, but they knocked it out of the park with this one. It's so fluid and natural looking that I can almost understand all the remaining sprite fights not holding up to the same standard. Almost. Overall, the visuals and atmosphere are stunning. A battle in the city at night not only makes all the electricity effects and Spider-Verse filters pop, but they also decide to not pull a Venom vs. Bane by having characters in black suits blend in with everything and instead make it actually nice to look at. On the note of the Spider-Verse effects, yeah. They also reference the best scene in the movie because, my god, why wouldn't you? Is it pandering? If you're stupid, maybe a little, but it's awesome anyway, so who cares? Miles and Static play off each other epically by showcasing Miles' superior strength and Static's veritable versatility by coming up with the answers to all of Miles' funky gadgets, all the while trying to showboat each other. All the while, a literal rap battle backs up the entire fight. What's Up Danger is just so good, man. JT Music, SWATS, and Omega Sparkx are an epic trio, and it reflects the battle by having Static absolutely crush poor Miles. This is the best season premiere since Dante vs. Bayonetta, and that's pretty funny, not gonna lie, Wiz. Before we continue, I want to give a big thank you to this video's sponsor. What the fuck? Prior to Season 7, Death Battle bonus episodes were less like Death Battle and bonus episodes and more like shit posts. But from this season onwards, they're in a goofy, funky area where they're treated like Death Battle episodes with an analysis, fight, and conclusion, and they're in official playlists. On the other hand, they're not part of the official episode count, and they're structured differently, and I know I've gotten questions about whether or not I'll talk about bonus episodes going forward, and my brain hurt. So if you haven't already guessed, going forward, if a Death Battle season has a bonus episode that expects me to take it even somewhat seriously, I'm gonna stop in the middle of the ranking to talk about it. Why not? With all that said, this is the 7 Battle Royale, a simulated battle based on the Amazon original series, The Boys, as they so eloquently and frequently put it. This kinda blows. The analysis litters in the same joke about Wiz and Boomstick dogging on Vought to frame one backpedaling whenever Black Noir even breathes. The simulated Battle Royale isn't technically the worst thing I've seen, but it is very, very, very sluggish. The sprites are well made in spite of it being heavily dorkly coded. Homelander. Why is he here? He acts as referee in case things go too far, and then he only shows up at the very end to kill Billy Butcher. Okay, yeah, neat. The only death that goes above being mediocre is Queen Maeve's, and even then, that's basically a repeat of a death we've had 3 episodes prior and was way cooler there, so who cares? The others were obvious, not very impactful, or bastardize a character. Nice! Billy's one win condition was a laser baby, not even a part of his arsenal, and wasn't even name dropped in the analysis. There was even a separate video dedicated to the post-fight conclusion where they said no character had any obvious advantages. Meanwhile, the entire post-fight analysis discussed how obvious each character's advantages were. If I had to rank this anywhere, it would be right above Batgirl versus Spider-Girl. Oh my god. The only edges I feel Grey versus Esdeath have above this are much better backing music and ironic enjoyment, which those alone are way more than I can say about this. I get it wasn't a planned episode, but it doesn't really change how flaccid the comedy and animation were. The worst thing you can say about this episode is that it did its job. It got people to watch more of The Boys. And it made this episode way worse with the added context they have now thanks to Death Battle's own promotion. That's depressing and amusing, I gotta say. Alright, let's get back to the big gaming ranking. Rooster Teeth, please, I beg you to be a normal fucking company and not strike me down for sneezing out Red vs. Blue footage. Okay, cool. So, Red vs. Blue, I gotta admit, was a curveball for the series, yet somehow also totally inevitable. Analysis was fine, I think they covered the teams pretty well, and there were jokes in there. I mean, somebody out there's thanking God. Now, the fight is pretty funny to discuss because we're in the top 10 and this bag is as mixed as they fucking come. I think the positives outweigh the negatives, but that doesn't mean the light is ignorable by any means. For a fight that's arguably the main representation of a series well known for humor and character interaction, it somehow ends up being this animation's weakest points. The humor less so because it did get a few chuckly doos out of me, but my god, what happened to all the boys? Tex and Sheila have no dialogue, Donut only has one line, Church and Tucker sound pitch shifted, and Griff just sounds bored. That leaves 4 out of 10 guys that I have no problems with, especially with Caboose, given that he had to get recasted. Even then, the majority of the banter feels non-existent, which is shocking that this episode somehow has it worse than the other Red vs. Blue episode, given that one of the combatants doesn't even speak. But the characters using their mouth devices to make words isn't even the only issue I have with how the boys are used, because, my god. Sure, the choreography is mostly really great, even though Griff seemingly attacks Lopez for no reason, only to use his big Griff gun as a physical weapon to miss Tex a trillion times and not for his big Griff gun, and only then show Lopez aiming for Sarge rather than before him getting bonked. But no. Anyway, the point is that aside from Lopez and I guess Sheila and Tex, all the deaths suck. Despite saying the suits can withstand 50 megatons of TNT, they all go down like flies. Simmons dies before the real fight even begins, despite highlighting an insane speed feat. Griff also gets deleted really abruptly, and Sarge made a quirky one-liner about his death coming across as out of character, though I can forgive it somewhat since the point of this episode is a what-if scenario taking place in the early seasons. Sarge also gets the most predictable payoff ever, and everyone else dies via obvious time restrictions. That's so great! The worst part about all of this, like any other misused characterization, is that I wouldn't have even noticed it was a problem had people with like more than 5 seconds of experience hadn't already pointed it out, so that's great. Okay, I had to get all that out of the way because otherwise this battle is come. It's been so long since we had a good old team fight, and I'm so glad they pulled off everything and had multiple separate fights without feeling overwhelming. I felt totally whelmed watching this. The hand-to-hand and gunplay is phenomenal, the colors are so vibrant, the sound design is crisp, Blood Gulch Bedlam is going straight on my tombstone, and generally speaking, there's very little jank to be seen. At least unintentional jank, because they go out of their way to animate them talking like the old machinima days, and even the sped up falling bits were played for comedic effect are appreciated in spite of the surrounding circumstances. I know I had a whole research dossier about all the negatives only to run through all the remaining talking points, but A, this segment and the rest of this ranking has gone on for way longer than I wanted it to be in spite of me not knowing a single goddamn thing about a red or a blue, and B, it proves that even in spite of some nasty blemishes, if the core content is good, then I walk away satisfied. The animation's almost 5 minutes long. That's like an MCU feature length in comparison to a majority of death battles nowadays. The only other thing was that this episode got delayed because, according to their words, to promote Red vs. Blue Zero. Even though this was gonna come out before Red vs. Blue Zero, and that's kind of the whole idea of promotion, so really, if anything, I guess they didn't want to overshadow? I mean, hey, I get it. Nobody's a Nostradamus. Then again, it's not like the episode that got pushed ahead of the Red vs. Blue episode suffered, really. Saberwolf vs. John Talbane. Finally, a dog episode. It's always nice to see Killer Instinct covered again in spite of its, I want to say mixed track record, but I only really liked one of the episodes before now. But at least having a track record is better than one episode in season 1, my god. It was fun learning more about the two boys, but that's really due to being at the point of the season where they giga cut down on all the versus shit, and I'm thankful. I need more content of Wiz explaining stuff in fighting game terms and Dummy as a puppy. The fight, meanwhile, is vicious, though not without its downsides. The setup is a little lame since John Talbane of all wolves should be the one to emphasize with Saberwolf pleading for forgiveness after an uncontrolled rampage, but instead found it grounds to pick a fight, okay? A lot of the first half is pretty sluggish, and I think the worst part about this fight is the sound design. I threw my dumbass defense for Metal Sonic vs. Zero, and I still stand by all that, but I can't really defend it here. These are supposed to be bloodlusted beasts in combat, and most of the hit effects sound like slapping pool noodles. There's no brain trickery here, and it's very funny that Beast vs. Goliath somehow has more scenes of fast-paced bestial combat. But would you believe me if I said that Saberwolf vs. John Talbane was a better episode?
No, that's not real, no!
In spite of the terrible sound design, this fight fucks. The gritty, dark atmosphere, the good voice performance that Jello Apocalypse of all people gave for John Talbane, the absolute phenomenal voice performance that Chris Guerrero gave for Saberwolf, Brandon Yates and Trey Watson giving the most guttural, screeching voice performances of the custom track Blood Moon. Oh wow, a Halloween episode that totally nailed the atmosphere. There's no way! I really love how their fight knocked over the lantern to throw the fire all over the place to not only tense up the atmosphere even further, but also as a Chekhov's gun for Saberwolf to use the fire bats. And not even a traditional way of just fire bat comes on screen. All the bats zoom in the fire and blitz John. Like, that's a sick way of demonstrating that attack. I also like how Saberwolf, known for being a little stupid, picks a defense that doesn't work, even though he switches between two different poses that just looks a little awkward. But whatever, the pace is finally picking up. They're both fighting in the graveyard, throwing out quick and nasty attacks, all culminating to a phenomenal ending. The Blood Moon begins to overtake John, and while his guard is down, Saberwolf rips out John's intestines and attempts to strangle him with them. I don't need to explain how brutal or creative this sequence is, so we're moving on. John fighting back against the Blood Moon to essentially make a comeback in the fight was hype, and it all comes to a head here. The fight then looks like a Mad World screenshot with the monochromatic palettes, with the only source of color being the ridiculous amount of blood, as John makes the conscious decision to let the Blood Moon overtake him as a means for the best kill of the whole season. If you listen closely, you can hear Saberwolf's yell get less feral, implying the very last of his humanity being ripped away from him. My god, that fight was kind of a rough start, but it was so worth it in the end. And somehow, there are 8 more fights in this season than I prefer to it. Ain't that crazy? Call this a no-duh point, but the thing with death battles is that more often than not, they try to give a very general coverage of whoever they use. You see someone like Luigi get announced and then think, okay, they're gonna pull from the games and such. There's no way they'll ever specifically do like Danny Wells Luigi, right?
We'll get there one day.
When Flash vs. Sonic was announced, I was shocked. I never thought they would ever do ultra-specific versions of characters as individual combatants. And to see that on the next time trailer of the hellscape that was Zuko versus Todoroki, my mind was racing. It opened the door to so many possibilities. Like, why not do Danny Wells Luigi now? At the very least, they do this sparsely, which is a good thing. Don't want to be too niche with your funny versus show. And to take one of the most flaccid matchups I'd ever seen and use the most batshit overpowered versions of both was the best call. Only watered down by just calling it Flash versus Sonic instead of Wally West versus Archie Sonic, but analysis was good, not great, blah, 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 whatever. The fight goes kind of bonkers. I do say kinda because it doesn't really use as many batshit reality warping abilities that we learned about in the analysis. I mean, for God's sake, Super Sonic was on screen for not even half a minute. And aside from like 2 lines after the initial preview, there's like no banter afterwards, which is really strange given that one combatant is a younger Flash and the other is Sonic the goddamn Hedgehog. And not really an immediate negative per se, but it's got an opposite problem to Flash versus Quicksilver. That episode had all the speed, but for what? City zooming? Birds? Flash vs. Sonic has all the spectacle you could ever want, but aside from this 6-shot, very little of the incalculably fast speed is shown. But given that it basically means they're on equal footing and the cameraman needs to keep track of it, I can let it slide. Okay, enough complaining. This fight's pretty epic. In a season that wasn't super strong in the environmental design, in my opinion, the spaghetti of a cosmic highway and the pink fruity whatever that is were humongous breaths of fresh air. And it helps they look good too. In spite of how we could have gotten more banter and funky abilities, the ones we do get aren't that bad either. Whoever wrote this,
Don't mess with the Hogs dogs,
needs like 40 raises. On that note, the voice acting was really good. Joshua Waters gave a very good show with Wally, and Nicholas Andrew Louis is back at it again with Sonic. I still prefer his performance overall in Mario vs. Sonic 2, but that's mainly due to his last line here. Not the deep voice, apparently that's just a thing with Ultra Sonic, and that's pretty cool how it was worked in here. It just wasn't delivered super well, and I'm not sold on the idea of Sonic of all people commemorating someone being faster than him. That said, everything else about the end rules. The effects are breathtaking, the sequence of Wally waiting out Sonic's Ultra Form duration was pretty cool, and even though it wasn't made clear that Sonic was reliving his entire life until the following Death Battle cast, the fact that we even got that was, you know, cool. I also love how Wally was so taken aback by the experience that he doesn't even need to make any quirky out-of-character comments, roadie. While it could have maybe benefited from a season finale slot to allow more time and budget to use some more insane abilities and maybe a little more spectacle here and there, I'm still satisfied with the final episode and will definitely not put it against this episode for that 3-episode streak of Marvel and DC characters. Nope, not at all. I would never. Cable versus Booster Gold is one of those episodes. You know, a blind sight in like the worst way possible and like, what the fuck, why would anyone ever think that's a good idea to do and then it somehow ends up being a banger? Yeah, you know. Then again, should I really be surprised? It's another case of the grittiest, most serious guy ever made going up against... Yes, but oh man, I wonder why they keep doing this type of fight. Maybe because it's awesome? Nah. Yeah, so Booster Gold just decided to take the Aquaman approach and decided to carry the entire fight. These motherfuckers need to tone their backs more. Rico Fajardo was given the best script he could ever have as he hams the ever-loving hell with his role. Maybe that respect was carried over from the analysis going over bitch-ass Booster Gold's redemption arc? Who's to say? But his showboaty attitude was a joy to watch. Though unlike Aquaman versus Namor, Booster carried the fight, but only barely. Dave J. Nixon's performance as Cable also worked exceptionally well. His lines are short, but it works for his blunt attitude, and the two bounce off each other like, you know, no duh they would. In spite of the predictable punchline, Booster using the Breath of the Wild stasis mechanic and Cable not even being remotely phased was one of my favorite scenes of the season. And oh, would you look at that, we have yet another time travel fight, and of course the community took that inch and ran a mile with it.
I set this up while you were playing Roadkill. Funny how time...
Thank you, Cable! Very cool! The choreography isn't super compelling, admittedly. They use a handful of funny gadgets and command this goofy-looking man right here. But as you can tell, that's not really the main focus here, huh? Though the ending does work very well in terms of banter and creativity. Booster tricking Cable into thinking he's already won, only to give his strongest weapon right to him. His last words being very sharp as he gets twisted and crushed like a Five Nights at Freddy. Good God. Yeah. That was fun. I didn't have as much to say as I thought I would, but Cable versus Booster Gold is the type of fight that doesn't care if you discuss it, it just wants to enjoy the show. Good shit, boys. You got me to call Booster Gold a GOAT. You can't say Death Battle can't do miracles. For a season that brought the highest volume of Marvel and DC characters on the show, and as much as I didn't want the finale to officially cap that capacity at exactly 50% of all episodes featuring a character from at least one of either series, yeah, not gonna lie, Wiz, ending off the season with Hulk versus Broly was somehow one of the most poetic things they could have done that year. Yeah, it was lame seeing yet another Marvel character, let alone another returning one at that, but at the same time, a majority of the season already felt kinda samey. It was almost like they knew ahead of time the kind of reputation Season 7 would ultimately get, so like, sure, why not? Hulk versus Broly is by far the most thematic matchup in that category, and deserving of a finale spot, and if there's any episode that should cap off a comic book heavy season, there's worse options. I gotta admit, a Marvel fight sponsored by a DC film, now that is a little keck W. There was a You Mad Bro meme at the tail end of 2020. What planet am I on? The analyses were very informative and had some good jokes. They did it. The one Boomstick dad joke this season that wasn't eye-gougingly awful. Truly the ultimate way to culminate a season. Remember when I said that red versus blue was the mixed bag of the season? I stand by that, but this one's a close second. Yeah, it does kind of take from the Thanos vs. Darkseid book on how to make your universe destruction not feel like universe destruction, and the blame is entirely on the sound design. Everything sounds so far away, and as a result, there's no room to really make it sound at all like anything. And even some of the regular hits are like, meh, and overall really muddies some scenes that should have been really cool, like Hulk's decapitation and most of the individual planet destruction. Somehow Hulk hitting his own titty was the most impactful hit of the fight. Most of the stuff in the beginning too, like Hulk takes on a fast fighter approach and it's just weird to look at, like things go on a little too fast in my opinion. I get that the vision for this fight was to fill it with as much spectacle as you can imagine, but by lacking most of the impact, you sadly pale in comparison to Hulk's previous episode in just about every way. That episode has way meatier combat and a contender for the best ending of the entire series in spite of the significantly smaller scale. But I can't really blame this episode too much considering it wrote itself into that massive corner. And even then, we're almost at the top 5. I just want to get those downsides out of the way because the highs are super high. Very much fitting of a season finale. In spite of the meh looking models, the environments, effects, and overall vibrant aesthetics are stunning and help at least add more to the key blast and the godlike reality breaking scene. The voice acting overall is solid. Richard Barcenos works well as Hulk, and Nicholas Andrew Louis, you know, the guy I mainly associate with rad tubular cool teenager kid type beat, knows how to put on a serious face, and I think he did pretty well as Broly. And the two of them are given a really sick exchange in particular. Broly initiates the fight by saying this:
"You're making me angry. You won't like me when I'm angry."
Which was kinda cute, using Hulk's line against him, but Hulk?
"You are monster?"
No, the devil!
That is fucking sick. Not only did he turn it back around, but it also called back to his Devil Hulk run. Best line of the season, free. In spite of the planet and galaxy destruction lacking in being ear candy, them working it in at all makes this fight nothing short of eye candy. All the while, the slick solo from the custom track Ikari, which is already a really great track, somehow works for both characters in spite of not being as heavy as you would expect. Of course, it all culminates in a very awesome moment where they destroy a shit ton of galaxies like it's a Sony Vegas default transition. I mean that in the nicest way possible, I swear. And then shatter reality. And then several more realities. Oh my dear god, they just headbutt each other a trillion times. Holy shit, I don't know how they did not make that seizure-inducing, but you know what? I love it. Also, side note, I, for one, was very happy to see Broly win. He was my favorite going in, and I fully expected Hulk to take it, but nope, I just went instead. Yeah, in spite of its many flaws, everything else surrounding it made it yet another Dragon Ball banger and another very awesome season finale. Perfect way to cap off Season 7, I think. And then a Boomstick dad joke post-credits scene. You know, I want to gain her off the Empire State Building, but if it means an end is in sight, fine, sure. Given my history with TMNT on the show and how the TMNT Battle Royale was my first episode ever that I still like an embarrassing amount, I gotta say, if Leonardo vs. Red Ranger Jason didn't surpass all of Leo's other episodes by a country light year, I would have killed myself. I'm glad they at least abandoned the stupid drug rhetoric from Mikey and can still call him stupid without calling him a slur, but that does also mean they still dog on Mikey, and that's L. Other than that, and some jokes you could classify as jokes, the analyses were solid. They take a more unique Saturday morning vibe to it with the characters themselves and the upbeat music playing throughout. It was pretty nice. But the fight? Ooh lordy. It has the Metal Sonic vs. Zero effect on me, where it's a sprite fight in the modern day, but does subtle things to trick my brain into invoking massive nostalgia. The crisp sprites, the bright lights contrasting the night street, the dialogue reminiscent of a Saturday morning cartoon episode, with the chip tune going absolutely crazy in the custom track Teenage Morphin Ninja Power, which I do gotta hand it to him, is the best case of using the words Teenage Morphin Ninja and Power.
Never have gaslighting techniques felt so nice. And the best part is I don't have to psychologically justify myself into thinking that this one's okay. Cheers, bitch!
The fight is on the shorter end of modern death battle animations, but it keeps a brisk pace and your attention throughout, so I can't complain. It all picks up when Leo uses the Healing Hands mantra and the Odachi to give us this epic exchange.
Behold the immortal turtle! That's bogus!
Leading to the awesome teleport combo for Jason thinking he has the upper hand when Leo basically uses Peach's side B. It's goofy and awesome at the same time, and that's really how you would describe TMNT and Power Rangers to begin with, to be honest, so that's nice. We also get a shockingly intense final air battle for Jason to deliver the one Power Rangers W on the show, complete with an unnecessary explosion just like in the show. That's cool! There are a few itty-bitty minor things holding this episode back, though. I don't really care for how Leo is just out in the open eating a pizza, and Leo overall is more characterized like Mikey with his goofy lines and his somewhat headstrong approach to the battle. And while the death was cool, it does end with this weird shot of Leo's blood seeping into the sewers. I don't know what that was, but I'm just gonna go with the niche headcanon that it's a reference to the TMNT Battle Royale where he killed all his brothers. And in spite of the brisk and to-the-point nature of the fight, part of me wishes there was a wee bit more, but whatever. We're at the top 5, and this episode does just enough to be one of the best sprite fights of the season, so who can complain? Season 7 brought about the concept of a mid-season finale, so by proxy, we now have a mid-season premiere for everyone to make a bigger deal out of than it actually is. And it gets double the epic points for the fact that as of writing this video, it's not real. At least not on YouTube. Anyways, my god, Beerus vs. Sailor Galaxia brought the season back with a big ol' bang. They not only debuted one of the most influential anime ever on the show, but also gave a deeper dive at the modern mechanics of another one of the most influential anime ever. And like the official premiere of the season, it's a sprite fight with such high quality that it set a precedent for all the other sprite fights to follow. And, well, take a guess how that worked out. This was the episode that also featured Dummy, and I like him. His self-deprecation stick can be a bit grating sometimes, and sure, because of that, it means most of the cutaway humor is gonna devolve into more slapstick, but he bounces off Wiz and Boomstick shockingly well, and the two co-hosts already contrast each other well enough, so it was a risky play adding a third wheel, but no, he's epic! Wiz also researches inflation. This fight goes crazy. It's almost like they realized how nothing of a fight She-Ra versus Wonder Woman was, so they decided to make up for it by having some of the most batshit universal destruction on the show. I say almost because Beerus was planned to be on next before the mid-season break even began, but my take is funny to me, so I'm gonna go with it. Sure, some of the individual planned destruction is kind of whatever-ish, but they make up for it by destroying everything else. That and the sound design goes above being dog shit, so that also helps. They even take one of the most destructive aspects and turn it to a centerpiece for the rest of the fight. As it escalates, they take their fight to the sun and they create a supernova, fight inside it, and eventually make a black hole out of it. And the two of them are so concerned with wanting each other dead, they just up and ignore it. In spite of their destroyer nature, there's also a surprising amount of humor. Good humor at that. Then again, it's Beerus we're talking about. Frankly, I'd riot if they didn't take advantage of that. Beerus and Galaxia bounce off each other super well, from Beerus' reaction to his tail getting grabbed, to Galaxia calling Beerus a stupid cat for getting blamed for the sun exploding. Even with how they both interact with the surrounding planets is funny. Galaxia demands royalty and Beerus doesn't care. It's awesome. And how can I not mention the final act with Beerus going Ultra Instinct, Galaxia attempting to take a star seed, and...
What? That's impossible!
Now you're catching on. I am the impossible!
No, seriously. How? And finally, a good black hole death. And then a hand-drawn Beerus that almost looks traced, but minor detail. What an amazing fight still. Did not expect this to be the best sprite fight of the season, but given it hardly falls into the really shit trends of bad rigging and excessive motion blur, at least in very isolated instances, who's surprised really? Nightwing vs. Daredevil was an episode. It had a lot of potential, but ultimately ended up as the first ever live action fight, so there was lots of room for improvement. A better script, more usage of weapons, more serious fighting choreography, a better death. Ultimately, the live action was a shiny coat of paint on an otherwise run-down car of an episode. So much to the inevitability, really, Winter Soldier vs. Red Hood has entered the chat. This was the episode that began the godlike editing we'd see for not just future Marvel and DC episodes, but with most manga and comic editing in general, and thank God for that. There's only so many times I can look at blank pages in a season chock full of comic book paneling. That said, aside from good story coverage and one decent cutaway, I did not care for the analysis that much, and the conclusion fares a lot worse. They take a huge feat out of context and tell us not to take it out of context, okay. And one of their main points about Bucky having better defense is pretty silly when the armor they're comparing has Jason covering a much more vital area, aka his head, and the panel they show heavily implies that it's not an ordinary knife like they insinuate. It doesn't necessarily impact the verdict, it's just a really shit explanation, which is a shame because the fight is phenomenal. It clocks in at around 6 minutes, which is frankly surreal for a modern death battle, but they allow so much time to transition between set pieces, even a moment for them to break from the action, that they don't have to speedrun through everything. Jason attempts to eat a burger with his gloves on. Okay, now he has to die. Like I said, they improved virtually everything from Nightwing versus Daredevil, even the death, which is still dog shit. One love tap and then bam, the end. Jason survived this. And the ending shot hangs for a million years and makes us think Jason's gonna get back up. But no. Anyways, I'm getting a little sidetracked by the literal only negative in the whole fight, might be. The combat is way more intense. The gunplay and knife battle does way more to convince us that the two are actively trying to kill each other as opposed to hand-to-hand and some baton play here and there. Maybe you can pull off a dance routine with guns and knives, but good luck, bucko. The environment is also mwah. Sure, an abandoned car garage goes above your run-of-the-mill city street, but they packed so many Easter eggs here, and they alternate between the dining room and the kitchen. And there's way more to interact with than just slamming your knee on one car door. Both actors played their roles phenomenally, and they popped off with the costume design. The suits in Nightwing vs. Daredevil were great too, but it doesn't quite stack up to individual clothing pieces, that sick cowl, and Bucky's CG metal arm. Yeah, somehow that's near flawless too. There's lots of cool individual scenes, like Jason appearing behind Bucky, Jason kicking Bucky's gun away, Bucky making Jason shoot himself in the head with his own gun, Jason disappearing from the kitchen seamlessly. Actually, everything in the kitchen is amazing. My favorite part is the crowbar scene, where Jason's PTSD comes into play with the Joker voice overlaid on top with the music taking a more sinister turn. This scene should have been iconic, but I've also heard people criticizing it for being a little too goofy. Maybe I can see that, but A, his PTSD came from a fucking clown, and B, not all trauma responses are created equally, and trying to set a standard for something every victim suffers with in their own ways is a little cringe. Yeah, no, this was a massive labor of love, and is so far the definitive live-action fight, even if it single-handedly renders its previous outing obsolete. I hope for the next live-action fight, but let's also be real, it's probably gonna go to more shooty bang bang dudes. I'll get to certain episodes that people say should have been live action later, but let's be real, they're also talking about characters known for insane violence, and that's the area Ismahawk have always struggled with. I'll just wait for hell to freeze over. For those of you that haven't seen it yet, when you picture Goro versus Machamp, what do you think of? Yeah, that's about what I picture too. Imagine that, but awesome. Yeah, surprise of the season 3. Though it did not start that way with the analysis. This coming so close after Canary vs. Sindel made Goro's analysis repetitive as all heck. I get there's not much to work with Goro, and they had a few unique points, but a majority of the same feats, even the same jokes were pulled from any previous MK episodes, dear God. Boomstick even joked about his ex-wife numerous times, and they ended up as Walmart brand Boomstick dad jokes. How did I get here? Machamp's fared way better though. I appreciate them debunking the Pokedex while still giving benefit of the doubt, and Machamp's analysis had a lot more backstory than a good chunk of the combatants this season, and I don't know how to feel about that. Anyways, why is the fight so immaculate? Negatives. Well, Goro's model is a bit crusty, though the low light atmosphere does what it can to make it look good. They don't really take advantage of their four-armed combat all that much, but the few bits that did are sick, and the choreography is epic all throughout anyway. Some of the bits of impact are goofy, like Machamp getting his face caved in and then him being fine in the next shot, and how they don't react to getting their arms joinked out. But with the former, it's a nasty as fuck X-ray hit anyway, and it doesn't impact anything in the Mortal Kombat games anyway. And with the latter, you could argue it's more badass than anything how their immediate reaction to getting their arms ripped out is to keep fighting. It's not a Sanji situation where they flat out don't react. Goro apparently towers over Machamp, but in the fight they're mostly at the same height. but I really don't care about that. The death blow is kind of goofy with Goro's limbs flying out in the distance, but the entire death sequence is amazing with the camera spinning as Machamp does his 1,000 punches with the Kanto champion riff playing in the back. The final shot of Machamp's killing blow is awesome, and Machamp fading to his own burn was a funny touch as well. Yeah, notice how all my negatives came with a fat catch them. It's almost like we're in the top 2 or something. This fight bleeds adrenaline, and that's 99% thanks to the track. Four Fist Death Punch is insane and works in melodies for Mortal Kombat and Pokemon in one of the highest octane tracks in the show's history. And the remaining 1% goes to how the entire fight works with it. Yeah, I know, crazy, right? Somehow they made the dynamic of Goro's serious warrior attitude at its wit's end with a guy whose only word he can speak in his own name be one of the best dynamics in the entire show. Yeah, okay. Machamp dabs in this one. How is it not number 1? You can probably guess exactly why, but I think the best thing this episode did was make me like Machamp more. Pokemon is already my addiction and I liked Machamp enough already, but Death Battle making me respect a freaking Pokemon as a character more by the end is still one of the most glorious things this show can ever do.
I've heard people lament that this episode slot was kind of a waste since every 25th episode has gone to some pretty epic milestone, and this one fell on episode 125. But who the hell celebrates 125th of anything? No, yeah, can't wait for episode 275 when they finally tackle Poochie versus
Ochi.
Actually, that'd be pretty insane. You know, bad example. Let's just finish the ranking.
I find it funny how I've gone through a few rankings in the past where I really wanted to put a certain episode at the top, but ultimately I had to be honest with myself and admit that other episodes tickled my little fancy even more. Fast forward to now and I got 2 Death Battle rankings in a row that have an episode featuring a Naruto character at the top spot. Boys, we stay winning. Obi-Wan versus Kakashi. Delicious. Finally. A good fucking Star Wars episode. Both analyses portions are really good. As I will continue to preach until my timely demise, covering story is never a bad thing, and the way they make it work here is awesome. With Obi-Wan, they just start with his introduction in the original trilogy, followed by all his adventures in the prequels just as the films were originally released. Most of the versus junk is applied more as context than anything, especially when they go over how his greatest failure was his mentorship over Anakin, and how he's had to stop the literal chosen one. All the prequel memes and overanalyzing the high ground bit also help too. Kakashi's is a little more standard, but I also love how they emphasize Kakashi's tragic backstory and all the cool shit he's done in spite of that. It's still really good stuff, but oh my dear god, where do I even begin? I guess with the negatives, sure. Obi-Wan's supposedly a master of defensive playstyles, but mainly goes on the offensive, but Kakashi's the one who initiated the fight and plays at a distance, so it makes sense how Obi-Wan would need to close the gap. This scene is jank and does not match the otherwise breathtaking sunset lighting in the fight, but it only lasts for a few seconds and there's at least some bits of interesting action thrown in. I'm not a fan of the models either. Obi-Wan's goofy face expressions on a model based on Ewan McGregor, and Kakashi's hyper-detailed Jump Force model, but they both cancel each other out and blend in decently well, so I don't mind that either. Oh wow, that is it, huh? Easily the 2 highlights are Obi-Wan's prequel lines and the phenomenal Genjutsu scene. The former, they somehow made the idea of all of Obi-Wan's dialogue being one-liners and prequel memes work flawlessly, since they work as references and as normal dialogue. And the latter is one of the most intense blind sights a fight has taken in so long. The fight was already immaculate. Both get to use a good chunk of variety with force and elemental techniques. We get awesome scenes like Obi-Wan deflecting the kunai with his robe, Kakashi doing the 1,000 years of death, Obi-Wan escaping Kakashi's trap, all backed by force and lightning. A phenomenal track that blends the sweeping orchestral melodies of Star Wars and intense rock guitar beats from Naruto in a track that perfectly encapsulates both. Anyways, the fight was already great with the 2 bouncing off each other really well and the perfect level of intensity and action. And then Kakashi lands this. A scene that halts the fight to utilize one of the best bits of visual storytelling I've ever seen in a death battle. It takes the gravity and dark color tones of Kakashi's Sharingan and Darth Vader's Darth Vader-y traits and works with the precognitive attributes we know the Force and Genjutsu for. And Obi-Wan, seeing this, doesn't panic, doesn't even consider it as a premonition, just collects himself and
effortlessly
deflects Kakashi's attack. It is the best individual scene of the season, free, and we're still not done. We get that one janky scene, but an incredible finish. Obi-Wan dodges the Kamui as Kakashi revs the lightning blade and sticks to his never give up attitude, while Obi-Wan puts all of his trust in the Force. Kakashi's Sharingan eye even gets destroyed, but he sticks to his guns and even powers up the lightning blade, all revving up to an incredible one-stroke duel as Kakashi falls to the ground and Obi-Wan gets one last prequel meme in there. That's cute. It's not too short, but also not too long. It just hits the sweet spot, and goddamn, why do they keep making all the one-stroke duels of this show bangers? It's not fair, man. At first, this barely edged above Goro versus Machamp. Sure, I love me a good no-nonsense brawl between two men that reminds Boomstick he's a cuck, but Obi-Wan versus Kakashi is a breathtaking episode through and through, probably helped by a much better analysis and how there are two characters I'm attached to as opposed to just one. Thankfully, not the SFM team's weakest outing, imagine that timeline, but it goes to show that even when the good stuff doesn't quite hit the same peaks, what matters is that they still know how to deliver some good-ass content.
Oh, good God, finally, this stupid season's done! It was better than I remembered.
Yeah, I was definitely a little too hard on this one in the past. Okay, sure. Having a season with more episodes lined up releasing at a more frequent rate can negatively impact budget, resources, and overall quality, with the main victims being the sprite battles with stiff puppet rigging and excessive motion blur. And sure, the animated cutaways didn't hold up very well either due to the abrupt change in designs and most of them being slapstick comedy. And sure, the matchup lineup is pitiful regardless of how good the episodes ended up, by being unable to go more than 2 episodes without a Marvel, DC, or just straight up being a Marvel vs. DC episode, with them sometimes appearing back to back to back, and even most of the non-cape shit episodes had heavy reliance on comic and manga paneling that had the first 3/4 of the season be a mostly visually dull watching experience. And sure, this was the season that happened in 2020, the year of the baby peanut, but I forgot where I was going with this. Yeah, as I implied previously, this is basically the modern equivalent of Season 3. A season that didn't live up to the insane highs that Death Battle had been going off of for the previous seasons. One of the few differing factors is that Season 3 is the shortest Death Battle season with only 14 episodes, whereas this was one of the most bloated seasons since Season 2. So that's cool. However, I can only really fault it for so much considering how strong Death Battle had been leading up to Seasons 3 and 7. A decline was going to happen eventually. I was so prepared to go on a fat tirade about how this season was so disappointing and did not live up to the promises they set out before. But if anything, watching this season again made me respect Death Battle more than ever. They wanted to change their scheduling and experiment with their content more. It had some successes and a decent chunk of failures, and they would go on to learn from it and take the best aspects of the formula and improve upon that for future seasons. Even putting all the baggage aside, the episodes themselves fared a lot better than I thought they would. Sure, there were way more stinkers this time around, and even most of the good episodes have at least one glaring flaw holding them back, but they're still good episodes. This season gets too much shit nowadays because people hold the matchup line so heavily against it, which can be fair, but shove it aside for a second, and you might see a solid season underneath. I mean, it helps that they would go crazy with the editing and the analysis of all the Marvel and DC episodes, and that would also carry over into later seasons. So that's a dub, if anything.
When it comes to Marvel and DC on the show, I'm over it. I'm past the acceptance phase where these episodes are just kind of bound to happen, but that might also be because we're past 2020 now and they've relented a little bit with the amount of comic book shit on the show, so doesn't help that this season basically soured Marvel and DC's reputation on the show whenever an episode with either series gets announced. But it's like, guys, these characters are still pretty cool, and they still have insanely thematic matches, regardless of how fair or unfair some of them are. Like, we can stop being spiteful towards these matchups just because there's a Marvel and or DC attached to it at any time now. Now, yes, I did contribute to that bandwagon before. That's gonna be it from me, boys. Thank you so much for watching. I know I made it a thing to previously encourage you folks to watch my non-Death Battle related stuff, and here I am making another Death Battle ranking because, you know what? Click the funny buttons if you dare, and I'll see you next time when I take my time machine and kill Wiz on sight before he talks about Zuko.